Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for visiting the YouTube channel for bestbiblecommentaries.com. In this video, I'm going to talk about biblical studies resources that were published in 2021. In my previous video, if you haven't seen it, I talked about Bible commentaries that were released in 2021. By biblical studies resources, I mean the subcategory of biblical studies, or it could be theology or church history. There's even a couple of resources that I would call Christian living that I'm going to show you. So before I get into all of it, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and feel free to leave a comment or ask a question down below. The first book I'm going to show you is hot off the press. I just got it like 2 days ago in the mail from Kriegel Publications, their new release, Reprobation and God's Sovereignty, Recovering a Biblical Doctrine by Peter Sammons. Peter Sammons is associated with the Master's Seminary, which is John MacArthur's church. Associated with John MacArthur's ministry, and the foreword to this book is by John MacArthur. I've only spent a few minutes just kind of thumbing through this book. It looks like a resource that anybody could understand, so if you're a layperson interested in this topic of reprobation, then this might be a resource that you would want to consider. Reprobation and God's Sovereignty, Recovering a Biblical Doctrine. There were 2 releases this year in the 40 Questions series. One is a new release, 40 Questions About Roman Catholicism, which is on my left by Greg Allison. Then on my right, it's actually the second edition of the 40 Questions About Interpreting the Bible. I really like this series. It's also from Kriegel Publications. I really enjoy this series and don't regret the books that I have purchased in it. So it's great for lay people, and I think it's great for pastors as well. And so a book this size, you can kind of see how big it is. It's divided into 40 different sections, all answering a question about one of these topics. So I do recommend this series to you. So I'm just showing you some of the books I have that are off screen here, and then I'll get to the ones that are front and center. This is from Westminster John Knox Press. What Did the Cross Accomplish? A Conversation About the Atonement by N.T. Wright, Simon Gathercole, and Robert B. Stewart. So one thing that WJK Press, Westminster John Knox Press, is doing is they've been publishing conversations or debates, some of which you can find on YouTube, and they're putting them in book format. So they're not very big. This one's just over 100 pages, but the interesting part of books like this is that it gives you the literal back and forth between the scholars as they're interacting with each other in real time, as opposed to this series that I'll get to in just a minute, where one writes an essay and another one responds to it. This is actually a conversation that's happening, at a certain place and time. And so you get more of, it's a little less polished, of course, but you get a little bit more of the immediate feedback and reaction from the scholars as they discuss this topic of what did the cross accomplish, conversation about the atonement. So I do like these, by the way. I do like the debate book or the discussion books. This is a series called the I think it's called In 7 Sentences series. It's from IVP Press, and this one is Church History in 7 Sentences. There's others like the New Testament in 7 sentences, the Old Testament in 7 sentences. I think there's Philosophy in 7 sentences, if I remember correctly. And anyway, this one's Christian History in 7 sentences, so you get 2,000 years of church history in 168 pages. But what the author does, Jennifer Woodruff Tate, what she does is takes kind of the seven sentences that really helps give a reader an overview of Christian history, and gives the sentence summary, 1 sentence summary, and then elaborates on it. And then she does that 7 different times. So interesting series. Another one from IVP is the Theology of Jeremiah by John Goldengay. He is coming out with the revised Jeremiah volume in the New International Commentary on the Old Testament series. So he's been busy writing about Theology of Jeremiah. Actually, he's been busy writing a lot recently because he has all sorts of books that have come out. This is a mid-level resource, even though it's only about 140 pages or so. It is a mid-level resource, so best for pastors or those who are experienced using biblical studies materials. But if you're preaching or teaching through Jeremiah in the church, that might be a good resource to consider. Another new release from Kriegel is The Manifold Beauty of Genesis 1, a multi-layered approach by Greg Davidson and Kenneth J. Turner. Davidson is professor and chair of the School of Geology and Geological Engineering at the University of Mississippi. And Kenneth Turner is from, his PhD is from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's professor of Old Testament and Biblical Languages at Toccoa. I'm not sure how to say that. Toccoa Falls. And so it's a blurb by Tremper Logman, John Walton, and you'd probably be familiar with those names from Bible Commentaries and their work on Old Testament books in particular. John Walton has done a lot of work in Genesis as well. So they those are a couple of great recommendations. So The Manifold Beauty of Genesis 1, a multi-layered approach. See and celebrate the multi-layered grandeur conveyed by the first chapter of Genesis. All right, keep going along here. Try and go through these a little quick, just because so I don't make the video too long. By Ashley Hales has a book out this year called A Spacious Life: Trading Hustle and Hurry for the Goodness of Limits. So that's a little bit more in the Christian living category. This book I did a video on, I recall, a couple months ago, called The Trial of the 16th Century, Calvin and Servetus. And I'll just point you to that video. I think I did it maybe 2 months ago. It's its own video. It's a Theology Thursday video, and I talk more about this book. So that's from Christian Focus Publishing. This one is from IVP, An Introduction to Ecclesiology, subtitle Historical, Global, and Interreligious Perspectives. Like I said, it's from an IVP publication, and I actually have not spent a lot of time with it, but it's an introduction to ecclesiology. This one has looked very intriguing to me. I have not read it yet, but it's also an IVP publication called Conspicuous in His Absence. Great title. Subtitle, Studies in the Song of Songs and Esther. So it's a study in books of the Bible where God is not directly mentioned. And so it says, in the biblical canon, 2 books lack any explicit reference to the name of God, Song of Songs and Esther. God's peculiar absence in these texts is unsettling, both for theological discourse and for believers considering implications for their own lived experience. So, and it goes on, but Conspicuous in His Absence by Chloe Sun. Letters for the Church. So this is a book on the general epistles. This is also from IVP by Darian Lockett, who is professor of New Testament at Biola University. He has some great blurbs on the back of the book. So this would fall in the biblical studies category. This would work well for a Bible study, even in a church setting, Sunday school setting, small group setting. So it is about 225 pages, and it covers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 7 books of the usually called general epistles. But of course, 2nd and 3rd John and Jude, those are shorter books of the Bible. So just keep that in mind. But that kind of gives you an idea of how much depth the book goes into. So that's why I say might be a great book for like a Bible study or a small group or a Sunday school, something like that. All right. These 2 books, I know these kind of fall more in the Christian living category, and I've done videos on each of these, so you can look back at my channel and see them. Lee Strobel's release this year is called The Case for Heaven. I share my thoughts on this book about a month ago in a Theology Thursday video. This one, Timothy Keller, Hope in Times of Fear, The Resurrection and the Meaning of Easter. Shared my thoughts on this book probably last spring. I think that's when it came out. Yeah, probably so, because it's about Easter. So you can look back over my channel and see more information on these books if you're interested in that. Oops. All right, The New Creation and the Storyline of Scripture. This is a new series by Crossway. This one's by Frank Thielman, who, if you follow the world of Bible commentaries, he's written some really well-reviewed commentaries. And the series is called Short Studies in Biblical Theology, This one is The New Creation, the Storyline of Scripture by Frank Thielman. So I think lay people would do just fine with this. So lay people on up would be the target audience. This is also from IVP, Science and the Doctrine of Creation. Interesting subtitle, The Approaches of 10 Modern Theologians. So very interesting. The foreword is by Alistair McGrath. Some of you might be familiar with his name. So Karl Barth, B.B. Warfield. I'm just flipping through here and seeing different names. So there's 10 different approaches to this topic, science and the doctrine of creation. Oops, I'm getting on the screen there. And this is an IVP publication from earlier this year. Another one from IVP, From Plato to Christ, subtitle, How Platonic Thought Shaped Christian Faith. I have not read that one yet. Another one I have not got to yet is from Baker Academic, and it is a basic guide to Eastern Orthodox theology, introducing beliefs and practices. That's the subtitle, Introducing Beliefs and Practices. All right, let's look at the books in front and center here. Let me see which one I'm going to go for first, based on what might fall down first. This one is from Kriegel, The Prophets of Israel. Really high quality book. I did a video on this one a couple of months ago, so I'll point you to it for more information, but just really, really high quality book. A really neat publication full of full color photographs and lots of information about the Old Testament prophets. So The Prophets of Israel, Walking the Ancient Paths is what that's called, by James Hoffmeyer. The next one that it might fall down here any second is, let's see, the new release in the Counterpoint series from Zondervan, 5 Views on the Exodus, Historicity, Chronology, and Theological Implications. And there's 6 different contributors. So I really like this series, and I think this is a great topic for the series as well. So if you're into it, you can usually find the books from this series very cheap if you are willing to have an electronic version of them. So not uncommon to find volumes in this series for like under $5 or under on Amazon if you're interested in reading it in an electronic format. And I do like that series a lot. Okay, this one, I can't remember if I showed this in the video last week, so I thought, well, I'll just show it again. The Sermons to the 7 Churches. So it's really more of a commentary with some like study questions, like a guide, like a Bible study kind of guide. And it's a study on Revelation chapters 2 and 3. It's a little bit mid-level. So the guide, I think, is intended for lay people studying this material, but I think the content's a little bit more mid-level. Jeffrey Wima is the author, and is from Baker Academic. So if I didn't show it last week, I'm showing it now. All right, the next one is Discovering the New Testament, an introduction to its background, theology, and themes by Mark Keown. This is part of a series. Let's see. Okay, the series is called Discovering the New Testament, and this is volume 2 in the series, which is on the Pauline epistles. So there's Ephesians, and it's just organized book by biblical book. There's Philemon. This book, I think, came out maybe a month ago or so, maybe a little longer than that. Jesus According to Scripture by Darrell Bock. If you're familiar with the world of Bible commentaries, you'll know the name Darrell Bock. This is actually the 2nd edition of the book. The subtitle is Restoring the Portrait from the Gospels. It's co-written with Benjamin Simpson. Very well-reviewed resource. And it's over 700 pages in length. I would call it a mid-level resource. So the target audience is pastors and higher, although perhaps lay people who are used to reading biblical studies resources would be okay with it. This book came out maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, or at least I got it 3 or 4 weeks ago. I can't remember if I showed it on the channel yet, but It's by G.K. Beale, a very well-known commentary author and biblical scholar. It's called God Dwells Among Us, A Biblical Theology of the Temple, and it's part of the ESBT series, which I forgot what that stands for. Essential Studies in Biblical Theology. That's what it's called. That's what the series is called, Essential Studies in Biblical Theology. So this version of G.K. Beale's study on the temple is meant for non-academics, so perhaps lay people who have some experience reading biblical studies resources, and pastors as well would benefit from this resource. So there's maybe like 5 or 6 books now in this series. And so all the chapter titles in this book are all about Eden. Eden as a temple, expanding Eden, Eden lost, Eden remixed, Eden restored, Eden rebuilt, Eden expanding, Eden's ministry, Eden completely expanded. So G.K. Beale is an outstanding scholar, one of the most well-reviewed living scholars today, for sure. From Broadman Holman is the book Historical Theology for the Church. And this book has multiple contributors to it. And it goes like other biblical or historical theologies, it goes era by era. So in the first section is 100 to 500 AD. The second section is 500 to 1500 AD. Then the Reformation era, then the modern era. But there's different authors are contributing chapters in each of these different sections. So I actually did a video recently on historical theology by Greg Allison. So I point you to that video if you want a little bit more information on historical theology as a subject. I talk a little bit more about it in that video. From Pentecost to Patmos is an introduction to Acts through the book of Revelation. So, of course, there is another volume that covers the Gospels. This book is by Craig Blomberg. He's from Denver Seminary, if you're not familiar, and Darlene Seal. It's the second edition of this particular book. From Pentecost to Patmos, it is a textbook, so if you're a layperson and you're not taking a class and you're not in seminary, it just depends if you enjoy reading textbook approaches to biblical studies topics, if you would be interested in this resource. So, very big book. All right. The Handbook on the Gospels by Benjamin Glad. It's from Baker Academic. Probably a resource that is good for undergraduates, maybe seminarians, depending on the exact nature of the class, but I'd call it probably an undergraduate resource. I think lay people would do okay with it if they're interested in it. It is about 450 pages in length, but remember that all 4 Gospels are being covered, so just a rough estimate is 100 pages per Gospel. That's not a lot of depth, but it's an overview of the 4 Gospels, and that's what is meant by Handbook, a handbook on the Gospels. This is by Baker Academic. And Benjamin Glad is Associate Professor of New Testament at Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. And lastly, the Old Testament use of the New Testament. I did a video on this book when it came out, or maybe I just mentioned it. I can't quite remember now, but I know I've talked about it before on my channel. And the New Testament's use of the Old Testament has been a popular topic in biblical studies for a decade or two now, especially in the work of G.K. Beale, who I just mentioned a moment ago. And so this is an interesting approach, an Old Testament use of the Old Testament. I don't know how to say his last name. I'm not going to try, so I'm sorry. Mr. Gary, I'll just call him Mr. Gary. It's a book-by-book guide, so it's organized like a commentary would be like a 1-volume commentary would be. It's organized from Genesis to Malachi. And there is conversation about so I just turned to the Psalms, how the Psalms use other books of the Old Testament. And then there's commentary on those portions where authors use different portions of the Old Testament. So if a psalmist is quoting Deuteronomy, for example, the commentary in this book will be explaining how the psalmist is understanding and interpreting and applying that passage from Deuteronomy. So it's really an outstanding resource. I think this is going to be an award-winning resource. It's a new release, so not a lot of people know about it yet, but I think it's just a great, even for pastors, not just academics, but even pastors to have this on their shelf. I think it's a worthwhile resource. It's over 1,000 pages in length, and there's information on every book of the Old Testament, of course. So unique approach. I haven't seen this before. If you've seen something like this before, let me know in the comment section, but I don't recall seeing something like this before. That's over 1,000 pages, and it's just about the Old Testament's use of the Old Testament. So fascinating. All right. So excellent resources that God has given the church in 2021. Look forward to more in 2022. See you then.